gentlemen, welcome back to In Conversation with the Royal Butler. And for today's conversation, we're going to be talking about, dare I say, one of the most famous palaces in the world, Buckingham Palace, the home of the British Monarchy. As always, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. And can I just start off by saying thank you again for all the new subscribers. Welcome. Thank you for the likes and for all the fabulous comments. As I keep saying, I love joining in on some of these conversations, or your comments, I should say. Really interesting to read through them. A lot of very strong kind of views on different things, and it's just great fun. And also seeing some of you answering questions on my behalf, because sometimes I miss things, I don't always get the chance to check, and so thank you to anyone out there that is actually helping with the community. So thank you very much. But let's get back to the conversation for today, which is Buckingham Palace. Now, when you think of Buckingham Palace, you immediately think of the Queen, the late Prince Philip, and members of the British royal family. And a lot of you probably think that the palace has always been the home of the British royal family. Now, it isn't that long that Buckingham Palace has been the home of the British monarchy, because if you go back about 190 years ago, there was no members of the British royal family actually, well, certainly not a king or queen, living in the palace. And Queen Victoria in the 1830s changed that. But before that, it was one of their country homes, I suppose you could call it. Or to be exact, it was known as the Queen's House, and that refers to Queen Charlotte, who was the wife of George III, who bought the palace, or back then, bought the country house as a house for his wife, a country house. Now, prior to that, the actual house of Buckingham House was built in the early 1700s, I believe about 1703, and it was for the Duke of Buckingham, and it was a country house for the Duke of Buckingham. And then in the 1760s, I believe it was about 1761, it was then bought by George III for his wife, Queen Charlotte, as a country house, somewhere that she could go and have time away. And it was slightly smaller back then, but equally just as beautiful. And when George III acquired the house, he had no plans on it being the official residence of the monarch. And it was about another 60, 70 years later, when Queen Victoria became queen, that she decided that Buckingham House, to become Buckingham Palace, would be the perfect location and home of the monarchy. So she went around making plans to modify it. And especially over the 1800s, it changed quite a lot. So we saw it turn from being a country house into being a rather grand home, I suppose beginning to look like a palace. And then eventually they built the front wing on. Now, I love the story behind this, because when Queen Victoria kind of got it how she wanted it, it became not quite how we would recognise it, but it was beginning to grow in size. And back then, this might interest some of you, Marble Arch, which I'm sure some of you have seen in London, used to be at the front of the palace. It was the entrance to get into the palace. Now, Queen Victoria had this moved to its present location, and they built the new wing on the front. And the reason was her family was growing and she needed space for her ever-growing family, which of course became 9 children. And the new wing that was built on also meant it could house offices, further bedrooms, reception rooms. So it was something that then felt that it was necessary. And of course it has continued to evolve, obviously not grow so much in size since then, but it has been modified over the years. Now, of course, whenever there's any big royal news, whether it be christenings, marriages, deaths, it's always announced from the palace. And traditionally, you'd see the little board getting put on the gates, the notice of the occasion. That has slightly changed, where obviously it doesn't quite go on the gates. It's now put on a trestle so that people can view it, but obviously, hopefully, no one's going to be able to reach in and take it. But they still carry on with that tradition, and all major announcements are always sent out from the palace, as we all know. So it's very much a focal point for all of us when it comes to the monarchy. And of course, let's not forget the famous balcony. Whenever there's any, again, big occasion, we all know that that's another focal point, that we all look up to that balcony to catch a glimpse of the Queen or members of the British royal family. And before that balcony was there was another balcony. I'm not sure if you'll be aware, but if you actually go into the palace, into the quadrangle, and then into the actual entrance, there is a balcony above the entrance, and that was where Queen Victoria would have stood and waved to the crowds many, many years ago. But it's still there. But obviously, it's kind of surplus unless there's something taking place in the quadrangle, because if they go on that balcony, nobody can see them on the Mall. So it's sadly no longer really got a purpose, but the balcony that we all recognise is very much for all of us. I say all of us, I think it is for all of us, a focal point whenever there's any special royal occasions. So for me, when I began to work for the royal family, of course, one of the exciting things was actually getting to visit the palace. And of course, on many occasions, I've been to the palace, from attending courses, workshops, events, working at the palace. There's been many occasions, and every time I used to go in, it was always quite nerve-wracking and exciting, because some of you will know from the previous conversations, becoming a butler for members of the British royal family was a dream come true. And Buckingham was somewhere that I very much I grew up with and associated with the royal family. In fact, before I even worked for the family, one of my first trips down to London when I was working for the Dukes of Bedford, I remember the main thing, the focal point that the thing I wanted to do was to go to the palace, just to stand outside the gates and just see it myself. And it was quite special, kind of making that trip down to London on my own. And I think I might have met up with my brother at the time, and just went up to the gates and got a glimpse of looking into this famous palace, this famous building, and wondering what it would be like to actually go in and to see it. Now, of course, the palace at that point was already open in the summer to visitors, but I have a feeling that when I went, it wasn't. So all I could do was obviously view it from the outside. But it kind of gave me that dream and ambition of one day getting to work there. And I also went and had a wander over to Clarence House, which is just up from the Mall, which is the home of the Prince of Wales. And that, as I'm sure some of you remember, where I had my actual interview. But as I said, on occasions, when working for the Prince of Wales, we would go over to the palace. I always loved, again, whenever I used to go into the palace, I loved the fact of being in this place full of history. I mean, all the royal events, all the royal occasions, all the things that took place is just, it's quite overwhelming. I find it a little bit emotional some of the first times that I went there. And you can't just wander in. I mean, there's obviously security, and you've got to kind of go through the security checks and everything. And then when you're in there, you do kind of want to pinch yourself because you can't believe it. And it's even more surreal because I've gone round when it's been open to the public, and I'm aware of all the ropes and what you can and cannot do. But when you're in there, when you're working for the family and you're in there, there is no restrictions. You know, within reason, you can. I couldn't just wander around wherever I wanted, but there were certain areas that I was allowed to kind of go around, and to be in some of these beautiful rooms was just amazing, absolutely amazing. And just the wow factor was something else. So just in case the Queen personally invites you to the palace, here's some of the rooms that you might see, including the entrance hall, Marble Hall. Then we've got the beautiful and iconic grand staircase. Then we've got the East Gallery, which some of you will recognise because the late Diana, Princess of Wales, had some of her wedding photographs taken here. Then we have the White Drawing Room, which has actually got a secret door behind one of the mirrors. Can you work out which one it is? Then we have another drawing room. We have the Blue Drawing Room, but being a palace, 2 drawing rooms isn't enough. So here is a third drawing room. Here we have the Green Drawing Room, and in the distance you can see the throne room with the thrones of Queen Elizabeth II and the late Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. Then we have the State Dining Room, which I'm sure has seen many a king and queen wine and dine here. Next we have the ballroom, and as well as obviously hosting balls and parties, it's also where state banquets take place and investitures. And lastly, we have another beautiful room, the music room, which has been used for the christenings of the Prince of Wales and Prince William, the Duke of Cambridge. I remember doing dinners in the palace that the Prince would be hosting either for the Queen or for the members of the royal family, and they were great fun. I mean, a lot of work and a lot of running around. I mean, it's a big place. I remember kind of having to kind of get to different offices and different areas of the palace, and I would spend most of the time just walking around trying to find them. In fact, I remember at one point thinking you almost need to tie a piece of string somewhere to work out how to get to one part and then get back again. And yes, I would easily get lost, especially if I was kind of downstairs and in the basement area, which vaguely I just remember it being a maze. And trying to get, as I said, from one part to the other was tricky without getting lost. And the other thing I used to do, I remember again doing events in the palace, and somebody would ask me to go to a certain part of the palace to do something or get something. And I remember at this one occasion kind of walking along this room and just walking in a straight line. And I remember thinking this corridor just seemed to go on and on and on. And when I got to what I thought was kind of not near the end of the corridor, but to a certain point of the corridor, and I was getting a bit confused, I realised it was a mirror. And those of you who have been there will be aware of all the mirrors that are in there, which again was to give the view of it being even larger than it already is. So I didn't quite walk into the mirror, but I wasn't too far off that, and I remember kind of thinking, who's this walking towards me? Oh yes, it's my reflection. So I did learn the hard way, and I didn't admit it. So can we keep that to ourselves, actually? Talking of mirrors, there is a secret mirror in the palace. I'm sure there's many secret passages and rooms in the palace, but there is a secret mirror, a doorway in the palace, which the Queen uses, and it's so that she can get from the private apartments into the state apartments. So when she's carrying out official business, she comes in through this secret door, and it's quite amazing when you actually see it working, when you actually see how it does it. And there's a secret way of getting into this room, or how to open this, and of course the Queen knows how to do it. And it's quite amazing when you actually see her just literally disappear behind the mirror, behind this door, or vice versa, coming into the room, how suddenly this door suddenly open, this mirror suddenly opens up, and there the Queen walks in. It's can I say, it's very cool. But then the Queen is quite a cool lady, and I always thought, what an amazing way to make an entrance. But have I ever gone through that? No, because that would go into the Queen's private apartments, and that wasn't something that I would be expected to do when I was there doing work for the Prince. So I only observed like everybody else, but it was always quite amazing. I remember one of the very first events that I did at the Palace, and we had a break near the end of the event because there was some entertainment going on. And I remember sitting in the entrance hall of the Palace on the steps, and it was quite surreal because I thought, how many people get the chance just to sit down on the steps, as you do, while waiting for this entertainment to finish and just taking in the amazing surroundings and just enjoying that moment. And so when people say to me, did you have fun, or was there times, was there wow factors? Yes, I mean, there was, without question. But that was one of my memories that I loved. I couldn't believe that here I was in Buckingham Palace, chilling, relaxing, because obviously there was a break, and just sitting on these steps that have seen kings and queens and presidents and world leaders and all sorts of people kind of walk up and down them. And there I was with the other members of the household, just chilling, just waiting until we had our next job to do on that evening. And whenever we used to finish and you would kind of leave the palace and you'd kind of walk back up the mall back to Clarence's house, and you kind of look back and think, wow, I've just been in there, doing whatever we were doing. And it was quite an amazing feeling. And as I always say, these memories that I have, I treasure them, because how many people can say they've had those kind of experiences? As well as going there to work, I also got invited to different occasions. So I've been to the palace for different balls, parties, Christmas parties, garden parties, the Queen's 80th birthday party. So there's always been different occasions while I was there to go to the palace from a social point of view. And it was great fun because you get invited to these different events as a guest and got to experience it as a guest, which I think is really important in my line of work, to understand both sides of the coin, if I can say that. I think it's really important to understand, obviously, what's expected of you as a butler to the royal family, but it was also good to understand from a guest point of view what those needs might be. So it was a great experience, and just surreal to be invited to these different occasions and parties as a guest and mix and mingle with members of the British royal family. I mean, how many people can say they had that opportunity? And especially at the parties. I mean, the parties were great fun. The Christmas parties that the Queen and Prince Philip used to host. And again, there'd be a wonderful meals, there'd be champagne, drinks, music, dancing. And it was, as I've mentioned before, when I've danced with the Queen, it's quite amazing when you kind of look into this. I remember one of the parties, the dancing was actually in the entrance hall. It was kind of turned into a kind of an area for dancing, and you're kind of looking down there and seeing members of the royal family and staff members dancing, and it's quite special. I mean, really special. And you kind of think this is something that I would never have imagined I'd got the opportunity to do. I didn't actually dance with any members of the royal family on that occasion. I think I was so nervous and kind of taking everything in that you're just kind of watching everything that's going on and just enjoying the moment. And when you got to actually sit down and have a meal as well in the palace, that was quite amazing to actually kind of sit down and have a meal in Buckingham Palace. I mean, that's quite something. And with the Queen and Prince Philip. When I say with them, not all just round one table, because there's obviously, it's kind of laid up in a kind of formal way, but it was amazing, absolutely amazing. When I've been asked, was there any parts of working in the palace that I didn't like? I think it was there was two things I didn't like. One was getting lost. As I said, that was so easily done. I mean, you get told to go somewhere and you would end up at the wrong end of the building or something. The other thing I didn't like was the household side of it, the amount of staff, because working for the Prince of Wales, there was obviously a smaller staff, a few butlers, a few valets, a few chefs. Where at the palace, you magnified that by quite a lot. And it had to be, because it's a huge building. And as I said, it's the home of the British Monarchy. So it has to function and be able to deal with events and all sorts of things. So I could understand why there was so many, but I just preferred smaller households. So I was always glad when I went back over to Clarence House or even Highgrove, because it was a smaller organisation. But as I said, I understand why it was like that, but it just was somewhere that I would just feel there's a lot of people, there's a lot going on, and it could be a bit overwhelming. But when you got into it and you were in an event, it was fine and it was good fun. And when I used to go there, the team that I would work with were the team from the Prince of Wales. So it was people that I already worked with. So it was really it was perfect. Really, really good fun. The positives of working there, it would have been getting to spend time in this iconic building and getting to kind of be around these wonderful objects and treasures. And I even remember seeing things like Napoleon's campaign table. I mean, Napoleon, he had this wonderful campaign table that kind of spins round. And I remember sitting there one night having drinks at one of the parties, and kind of you were allowed to touch this. There was no restrictions or anything. It was used as a table. And I remember thinking, this is extraordinary. How many people can say they get this opportunity? So, there was a lot of those moments when you think this is amazing. Another wonderful memory and a kind of dream come true. I remember doing this course at the Palace on how to take care of furniture. Really interesting, really interesting. Just to let you know, what a lot of you are doing is wrong, because I was doing it wrong, and you suddenly discover the correct way to take care of furniture and fine objects and books. They teach you how to kind of look after books and things. It's absolutely fascinating. But I remember doing this course, and if memory is right, it was in the room where the famous balcony is. So it's when you see the royals walking out onto the balcony, that little room, that's where I was. And I say little because it is quite a small room. But it was amazing to be in there, to think. I mean, at that point, I was thinking back to Princess Diana and Prince Charles when they got married and stepped out onto that balcony. And yes, I did go over and have a little peek carefully, because obviously you don't want to suddenly start moving the curtain too much, otherwise you have everyone looking up. But we did have a little look out down the Mall, and it was amazing, absolutely amazing to see the Mall from that side. Instead of looking up from our point of view, I was able to kind of stand and look out from the Queen's point of view, and that was amazing. And I didn't obviously get to see the balcony in full because I didn't go out, but you could get an idea that it is obviously quite a substantial balcony, and just the history and that feeling was just amazing, absolutely amazing, and something that I will always treasure. One of those memories I will always treasure. But I'd love to say to all of you, if you get the chance to go to the Palace, you've got to go and see that view. But that's on the private side of things. So I very much doubt very few people get that opportunity. So yes, once again, great memories. I was told over the years that there's many stories about secret passages under the palace that go to different buildings, and I'm sorry to say I never saw them. I mean, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to see them, and I didn't really ask because I felt that it wasn't right to ask questions like that. And I wouldn't rule it out. It wouldn't surprise me if there were secret passages under the palace to different various buildings, because the palace has what's been there for about over 300 years, and it's been modified over time. And a lot of these country houses had secret passages and things. So it wouldn't surprise me if there was secret passages and things under the palace. But I'm sorry to say I haven't yet found them. But it's fun to think that there could be. Can you imagine the royals if there was especially when the Queen was younger, maybe finding these secret passages and kind of wandering around? It's quite amazing. So what's the future for the palace, I've been asked, and that's a really good question, because at the moment it's having a lot of renovation work done, because obviously it needs it. It's got into a bad way like any building. So there's a huge renovation project going on within the palace, and if anyone interested in that, if you go to the different social media platforms for the palace or for the British royal family, you can see, I remember seeing pictures and footage of what's been done. It's obviously a long-term project, but it's quite fun to see what they're doing, and it has to be done to secure the building for the nation. The palace isn't directly owned any longer by the Queen as such. It's part of it's the state. It's owned by the state, so it's technically owned by all of us, but it is the official residence of the Queen. When I think I've said to you before, the Queen's private homes, privately owned, to this very day, is Sandringham House and Balmoral Castle. But as far as the future goes, well, the palace is in safe hands. It's one of the biggest tourist attractions in London, without question. I mean, the monarchy generates millions upon millions for the tourist industry, so the palace is very much part of that, as is the royal family. And I hope this day is a long way off, when the Queen is no longer here and Prince Charles becomes king, it's very possible that he might not want to live there. Possibly, he might say, I'm going to carry on living at Clarence House. We have had a king before live at Clarence House, so it's not impossible. William IV decided that he wanted to stay at Clarence House when he was king, and he was the king before Queen Victoria became queen, and then she moved into the palace. So who knows? Only time will tell, but I think one thing is for certain is it will always remain the home of the British monarchy, or the kind of the one place that we will focus on in times of joy and sadness. And have I been back to the palace? I have. Since I've left, I've gone as a tourist and I've gone round. Very surreal having to kind of follow the rules and the ropes and the guidelines, but I do because I'm there as a tourist. And it's fun when I do go round with friends, family, or anyone, and be able to kind of remember and share my memories with them of when I used to spend time actually at the palace. I hope you've enjoyed today's conversation and it's given you a few of my memories, but also some insights, maybe some things you didn't know about the palace. And for a change, I have Shumba, who has joined me. He's decided not to go outside. It's a beautiful day again, but he's decided to come, haven't you? You decided to come inside and listen, because he knew it was a palace. It was right up his street. You know, he's very grand. And as soon as he hears the word castle or palace, then he wants to be part of it. So there we go. That's, yes, very good. Ladies and gentlemen, as I keep saying, please keep subscribing. Please share these videos because it helps build this community. Keep the likes coming in, and I will keep responding to your comments and your ideas. I'm loving some of your ideas of what you would like to hear about or what you'd like to see. So please keep those coming in. I will see you next Wednesday for the next At Home with the Royal Butler, and of course I'll be back on the Friday with the next In Conversation. I should mention I'm off to Bonnie, Scotland. I'm now, in fact, when this goes out, I've already arrived in Scotland for my annual Scottish holiday, and I'm thinking of doing some footage while I'm up there for the next At Home with the Royal Butler. A little bit of a journal so you can see what we get up to. But anyway, until then, stay safe and thank you for watching.